Hey, Elisa, how are you?
Hi,
Loving the new background.
2024.
We got to mix it up. So that session with IAB members on enforcement and where regulators are focused, I thought was super interesting. In your session, for example, on data subject requests, some of the things like they're kind of obvious, but actually they're not that obvious. Don't delete data just before you do an access request, right? Of course.
That's a logical one. You'd be surprised.
Right? It's like one of those things where you're like, hey, it might be cool if I do this, but no,
No,
don't bury the thing, right? Like make it so hard to find the button on your website.
right. Those,
Anything
I always think it's interesting to do an enforcement panel where you crowdsource different lawyers' experiences, right? Because then we get a composite that really does tell a story. And really, when we listen to enforcement examples, I put my in-house hat on. I want to know what things were at issue so I can quickly compare. Are we doing anything like
you
that?
done that? Yeah.
You're right, so that we can learn from. So I think the concept and is just so useful on that front. But the one of the themes that I heard in the enforcement panel was like, just sit in the consumer's shoes and go through the experience.
Yeah.
And how often we just lose perspective, right? We're so in the weeds on what has to be done. Is it all there? The structure all there? And then on the receiving side, the language might not be clear. You might not be able to find it. It might take too long that people abandon the effort because it's just too clunky. So those themes resonated for me.
Last night I found myself looking through Airbnb's privacy policies for some reason, a good bedtime reading. But I really liked what I saw because they said, hey, you want to opt out? Like, and just here you go. And just click the button. And there was no like which state are you in and do I really have to do this? And I just found it really refreshing. The other old favorite that came up was just do what you say you're doing. And I thought there was a really interesting angle there with how New York is approaching that,
Right.
where they don't even have a privacy law, right? But they're saying, hey, if you're offering an opt-in cookie banner because you just grabbed something you were doing in Europe and you thought, let's just do it here, even though you don't have to opt in, if you're offering that, you better make sure that button works.
Right, right. You're offering a choice. And I think particularly with privacy policies or banners, a lot of companies are just copying the language they've seen for a long time. But if you think about some of that language in the privacy policies, that was before these laws were created, right? The technology itself has evolved. And so put yourself back in the consumer shoes. Does it even make sense if you are in fact now offering an opt-out and global privacy control, and then suddenly you're saying something about cookies?
Yeah.
There's a mismatch there, plus not knowing what's happening on the back end in terms of what your website is actually doing. So yeah, do what you say.
Exactly. It's one of my pet peeves with what I see a lot of European based companies do, which is I'm going to have a cookie banner, I'm going to ask for opt-in. But before, as a consumer, I've had a chance to say yes or no. Those tags are firing, data's being collected. And I'm like, hey, that's not the point, right? The timing matters. And it was interesting that I didn't see them quite looking at that, the European regulators, or sometimes they may have. But for New York to say, yeah, actually, not into that. I
Right.
thought
Well,
it
there's
was
a
super interesting.
well-established consumer protection law in the US, unfair and deceptive trade practices. And so you can apply it really in any context, right? E-commerce, mobile apps, privacy, but you're communicating with a consumer, and those are promises, those are representations that you have to stand behind.
And there was a ton of interesting nuance around do not sell. One of the ideas I love there is this whole, okay, do not sell, like accept or reject. If I accept do not sell, like what am I saying? Am I saying
Well, it's
don't
the
not sell?
double,
Like,
right, the double negative, but also a
yeah.
lot of those like old modules, they were just taken from a GDPR cookie template. And so they also sometimes even have the European approach to cookie different categories. And then you'd have this do not selling, which then you'd have these toggles. And what does it mean? Which way? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a problem. Back to user experience.
And the solution seems to be something like, hey, when you swipe right, here's what's going to happen. And you just got to really unpack it. And like, hey, if you just didn't call it do not sell, it'd be a whole lot easier. So I thought that was fascinating. A lot of cool stuff like that. We should unpack some of those more. And then generally, we talked about this last time. It's not just about targeted advertising. They're thinking about sensitive location data for all the obvious reasons. They're thinking about healthcare. They're thinking about use cases outside of targeted advertising.
Privacy rates. They're
Yeah.
more than just the opt-outs. The opt-outs definitely are getting a lot of the attention, but there are also core rights that consumers want to exercise.
I'm wondering when, I mean, consumers at some point were reaching some tipping point. Like I just feel it has
Well,
to.
I'm making more requests.
Yeah. All right, Lisa. Hey, thanks. I appreciate your perspective. Have a good one.
All right, take care.
Bye.